Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organization defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. My name is Kara Dansky. I'm a former president of the U.S. chapter of WDI. Many of us have been active feminists since the 1970s or even 1960s. Our analysis of gender identity ideology has been consistent since Janice Raymond's The Transsexual Empire in 1979, along with her reprint of The Transsexual Empire in 1994 with a new introduction warning people of the emergence of the word transgender. So we were not surprised when this new attack on women came along, and we have not changed our analysis. In 2018, we wrote the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which lays out our position, and it has been signed by nearly 40,000 people from 160 countries and is supported by 553 organizations all over the world. To promote the Declaration and sex-based rights for women, we have volunteer activists, including country contacts from every continent. Please join us. You can also become a member of WDI to help our work by volunteering or donating. You can email info@womensdeclaration.com or find your country contact on the website, which is womensdeclaration.com. I'm very pleased about our panel today. We have Sharon Byrne from the Women's Liberation Front, or WOLF. She's the executive director, and she'll be giving us a report from the Commission on the Status of Women, Beijing +30. I also believe Sharon will be sharing some insights about a recent interaction between WOLF and last week with John Oliver. We also have Alison Jenner from the UK, who will be bringing us a report from the Liberal Democrat Conference of 2025. And I believe we will have Joe Brew and Sally Wainwright, who will be talking about lesbian persistence. I will turn it over to Sharon Byrne, Executive Director of WOLF. Welcome, Sharon.
A couple of things, and they're all sort of intertwined at once. And so I'll just sort of cover them the best that I can. One is, yes, I went to the UN Conference on the Status of Women 2.5 weeks ago in New York. And that happens every single year, usually around International Women's Day, March 8th, right? So a little bit of history for those who have not remembered it. When women start organizing and start agitating and get out on the streets and really raise hell, very big things happen. So International Women's Day, if you don't remember, I think started out of Russia with women that were agitating for bread and for soldiers who were gone in World War I, and it triggered the Bolshevik Revolution. Women in the UK, Denmark, and other places then picked up the Women's March and kept going with it, agitating for workers' rights and all kinds of things. It spread across the world and became a global movement for suffrage rights. And then in Spain, in 1936, women got really pissed off and took to the streets. And that spawned the Franco Revolution. So message here is when women get upset, and start taking to the streets, very, very big energy gets unleashed and very big things can happen. So I think the UN in their infinite wisdom declared March 8th International Women's Day to try to keep us from doing that and causing global upheaval. So usually the Conference on the Status of Women is organized around that. It's a vehicle. CSW is a vehicle within the UN. And for those of you that might not know, the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was signed in 1947, women shoved their way to that table, led by Eleanor Roosevelt. They insisted on being at that table, and they stripped a lot of the masculine language out of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Yay for them. Thank you for them, because we lean on that a lot in international human rights law. So CSW is a gathering that's annual at the UN headquarters in New York. Delegates from all over the world come, and there are sort of three main vehicles that go on in CSW. The first is the actual UN-based meetings that UN Women conduct. UN Women meaning the division within the UN. And what they're trying to do is get nation states to sign up to make commitments to further women's rights. And that means pledging money that will be given by governments to advance women's causes. It means work on things like CEDAW and the rights of the child. and getting nations to sign on to that. The United States is not a signer to either of those things, just an FYI. We are not a leader in this sort of thing. And so it's great. It's a great opportunity to meet women from all over the world. I've applied for Women's Liberation Front to have delegate status within the United Nations Conference on the Status of Women. We will find out this month, I think, whether or not we got it. But I usually am sent as a delegate from the UN Association of America. That's usually how I get appointed. But while I'm there, I give presentations from Women's Liberation Front. So we gave 2 this year, one on prostitution, and we had Dr. Farley with us, and Andrea Hines, who I don't know if you're aware of her work. She is a prostitution survivor from Canada, and she's great at advocacy, really, really good at it. And of course, you probably know Women's Liberation Front strongly supports the Nordic model. So we gave a good presentation on that. We also gave a presentation on pornography. And because we were given a presentation on pornography, I got hit right before I went to the Conference on the Status of Women by the French delegation, who said, hey, we noticed that you're doing something on pornography the day before. We'd like you to come to our thing, and then we'd like to go to yours. And we were like, okay, that sounds great. So we felt really good about that. And I went to their presentation, and it was really, really good. I got to say, I was very impressed with the French delegation's presentation. They had rock star slate of speakers, including their French Equalities Minister, really great minister from Scotland, Kristen Jardine, several others. They gave a really good presentation on pornography and why they want to do things to curb it, which I thought was great. So that was really good to go to. And then when I got there outside the French embassy, the sex work is work protesters who are waiting on us, just so you know, they're every bit as aggressive as the trans rights activists, right? The room was overpacked, and this was kind of very common all the way through the Conference on the Status of Women. Rooms were overpacked, and meetings were held off the UN campus. The French embassy, the French mission to the UN is a little down the road from the UN. I met another great Swedish minister of parliament, who was very excited about the work Women's Liberation Front's been doing in the United States on getting anti-pornography laws passed. We've managed to get that done in about 21 states now. This is one of the sessions that was held by UN Women. It was a bit of a rah-rah, pat yourself on the back, kind of thing from them. This is Stefan Dubrovnik, who is the UN spokesman, who does all the press conferences. So I got a chance to meet him. Sweden did a hell of a presentation. It's about 4 hours. And theirs was on prostitution. And I would say it was, again, overpacked, and it was at the Swedish mission to the UN. And one of the key stats that came out of their presentation was that Sweden got the Nordic model passed in 1999. So this has been 26 years of the Nordic model in Sweden. The Nordic model of prostitution basically criminalizes buyers. It sees buyers of sex acts from women as the problem. And so it will either administer criminal penalties, financial penalties, or a combination of both. Police must agree to, go after buyers and really crack down on them. The funds that are raised out of buyers, along with government funds, are then used to provide services to survivors and get them out of the trade. So it is an abolition model. It is an abolition model regarding prostitution. It is not legalization. It is not decriminalization. It seeks abolition by going after buyers. So we love that model because we would love to abolish porn, because Women's Liberation Front does not want to see any commercial sexual exploitation of women whatsoever. So that is why when Sweden was the first one, obviously, to bring this forward, which is pretty cool, they did it in 97. There was 65% opposition to this. So it took them 3 goes to get this into law. It took them 3 times to get enough public opinion behind them, enough public opinion to go for passing this law. In the time that model has been in place, there have been 0 murders of women in prostitution in Sweden. A couple of years after they got this done, Germany came over and said, hey, how did you do that? And Sweden explained the model to them. And Germany said, yeah, I don't think we're going to go that route. I think we're going to go for legalization. So Germany legalized brothels, legalized prostitution. Germany reports over 150 women murdered in prostitution since legalization. So we can clearly see which model it is that actually goes to protect women, which is why Wolf continues to advocate for the Nordic model. I got lucky. I'll show you a couple of slides. I met some other folks in New York. So this is one of our presentations. This is on pornography. If you have talked to Dr. Melissa Farley, she was one of our, keynote speakers in this panel, along with Andrea. We also had Anna Zabnina of European Migrant Network that did the prostitution forum with us. This is Sonia from the Swedish Women's Lobby. She was awesome. And she explained to me that about 2 years ago, they'd had the self-ID law in front of them in Sweden, and her team, the Swedish Women's Lobby, had worked to kill it. And I said, "Oh, I love you. I think it's always good to meet TERFs in the wild, right? Even if you didn't realize that that's who they were." So she was great to meet. That's more on the Swedish one presentation. Now, one of the big scandals that came out of CSW was that Reem Al-Salem, who is one of, I think, is possibly the finest women's rights advocate ever fielded by the UN, she was locked out. She was locked out of CSW. None of us knew it. I found out about a day before I went to New York that Reem's visa had been denied and that the UN was not moving to help her get it. And she was scheduled to speak at about 5 or 6 different, events, and I was going to go to all of them because Women's Liberation Front, like WDI, has submitted on several calls for input from the special rapporteur. So she also offered to video conference in, and the UN denied that. They would not let her video conference. I could not believe it. Obviously, at the Swedish embassy, we did video conference her in, but in the UN halls itself, by UN staff, no, she was locked out. I was fuming about this. A lot of women were very upset. Anna Zabnina's team, European Migrant Network, Migrant Women's Network, they did a presentation also in the Swedish church. Really good. They focused on women in Afghanistan. This was one of the big things that we focused on a lot. When you're at the conference on the status of women, you're talking about really dire stuff like female genital mutilation, child marriage, women who are unable to farm and feed them, feed themselves. And of course, dire human rights situations like Afghanistan and Iran. So there were presentations from women in Afghanistan. There were presentations from women in Iran. This is the studio of Diane von Furstenberg, again, showing you how much off-site meeting we were having to do outside of the UN. She hosted a human trafficking webinar. The gentleman to the right was very interesting. He runs a man's network. He calls men in rather than out. He's trying to coach them to be better men and not buy sex from women. He is trying to coach them to respect and take care of women. So that was an unusual approach. That group right there is New Yorkers for the abolition model, right? They're looking to get the Nordic model, which is sometimes rebranded as the equality model, passed to New York. So I was like, "Oh, I'd love to meet you because we would love to endorse that and love to help you get that done." So there is some legislation to move that forward, which is great. There's UN headquarters in New York. Inside the halls of New York, if your Spanish is not good, this is the rights of women, our human rights. There were quite a few of these kinds of posters up around the halls of the United Nations. Now, there were 2 emotions at the Conference on the Status of Women that I have not detected before. I have to tell you, and I've been going for 6 years now. The first was fear, and the second was anger. And the reason there was fear was this was the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration. That was a huge piece of human rights work that got done in Beijing in 1995. It was meant to mark a decade of progress for women. Corporations started opening departments of women. Governments started doing having women's departments. I mean, it was just this unbelievable unleashing of progress. It was also the high water mark, I would say, in women's rights achievements around the world. It's also where Hillary Clinton went to Beijing and famously declared women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. So it marked this just incredible decade of progress for women, which many of us were really young when that happened. And we just sort of always thought it was going to always keep going like this. And we were always going to get better and better. And never did we really foresee this sort of global rolling back of women's rights. So that was where the fear was coming from. There was this sense that in 1995, women rocked the world. And in 2025, the world is rocking women backwards. And all the countries were feeling it. All of them. They were all feeling it. It was just sort of a ubiquitous feeling. The anger was because we were all being shoved into these teeny tiny conference rooms in the basement of the UN or across the street at the Church Center, which is a dilapidated building, or at UN mission, various countries' missions to the UN. And yet Meetings like this, open-ended, informal, consultative process on oceans, were just going on. Business as usual was going on at the UN. So we were being siloed, absolutely siloed. And that is where the anger came from. This is a Belgian minister, Elizabeth Stevens, who is an equalities minister for Belgium. They did a great presentation on getting parity in their government, meaning representation is half women and half men. And what that required was passing a law to do that, which then triggered the parties to have to go out and recruit women early to get in the seats, which is great. This woman was from South Africa, similar situation. Oh, this is for Lear. So Lear and I are big believers in nonviolence. This is outside the front of the UN, and it's a monument to nonviolence. And while I was in New York, I got a chance to see a play that happened to be running, which was Liberation. It's going on the road. It is going to come probably to a town near you. Please go see it if you get a chance. It is about this movement, particularly in the United States in the 1970s. This is one of those basements that we were overcrowded into. This was from the government of Chile, and you can see all the women standing around the room. There were security guards outside of the room. Sometimes they would not let you in if you were at over capacity. So, it was really just overcrowded and under-resourced, in my opinion. And it made me mad. And then they had lovely, monuments to women all over the place, right, in the UN, but you sort of felt like it was a bit of lip service. Found in the wild. I went to the Tenement Museum, and there is a Protect Trans Kids sticker in the bathroom, and somebody scrawled under it, "Leave kids alone, let them be kids." And I was like, oh, love New York. Now, this was a good panel discussion too. This was also across the street in the church center. And I believe the Netherlands led this one, and it was about how we took 2 steps forward and 3 steps back since 1995. This theme was very common throughout the conference. More kind of stuff. Now, this presentation was a really good one. On the far left is a Ukrainian member of parliament. Next to her is a trans guy from Brazil. Next to her was a really brilliant woman from the Netherlands, and next to her was a Mexican senator. And what they wanted to discuss was how we are losing women's political participation because of the threats, the silencing, the ostracization. Y'all are very familiar with it. The Brazilian women were furious that this guy was there. And of course, when he talked, this was the reaction in the room. There was not a lot of trans stuff at the UN. There was a little bit. I walked out of a presentation that Canada did where they were trying to talk about, litigation as a tool to oppress women, right? That you just sue them to death. And so I walked out of that because they all were doing the pronouns and two-spirit and all that garbage. And I'm like, I'm not going to sit through this. But you can see here that the Brazilian guy got zero traction with the women in this room. And again, look at how overcrowded these rooms are, right? This was one of the Portuguese woman that was next to me in this session. And then this session was from the Ukraine women. Made me cry. They got up and talked about how is the situation in Ukraine, the amount of oppression that they are experiencing due to the war. It was really painful. And there was a very good film festival in all of it. So that is my report on the UN Conference on the Status of Women. The other thing I will add is that in addition to this fear and anger that was sort of very pervasive, there was a petition that circulated and that went around, and I signed it. And that is to let the UN know that Conference on the Status of Women as a vehicle for delivering women's equality is a failure and needs to be revisioned, redone, revamped, all of that. Y'all are probably aware that there have been huge global events taking place this week. I think quite a few historic institutions might fall, NATO, the United Nations being among 2 of them. I have no idea how this all turns out. I see tremendous opportunity there that if an institution as historic as it may be is not working or is corrupt or is falling down, this is the opportunity to build something better in its place. And there was quite a sense there of that's what we need to do. So coming back from the Conference on the Status of Women, that was great until I got to my desk and saw an email from the John Oliver show that was very accusatory, very harsh, right? Just very, really, really crappy. And so kind of put us in a spin here. And again, they were attacking Reem Al-Salem. They were going after Reem Al-Salem for putting out the report last year that we submitted on women's sports. And we used the site shewon.org. for some of the stats that we used. There's another site that's up now too, which is hecheated.org, which is great. So I got to tell you, we took it very seriously at Wolf. We worked really hard on the response. It took me a couple of days to write it, got it over the wall. And then just on a whim, they had offered, have a talk, would you like to have a phone call with us before you submit? And I said, sure, let's have the phone call. So the person who contacted me is D. And I said, great. And D, like DEE, right? So I said, great, I'll take the call with you. So the phone rings and it's a New York number. And I answer, and this man's voice comes through. So I was like, D, I was expecting a woman, to be calling me. Is this short for something like Deepak? It's a multicultural world. So, is D short for that? He said, no, that's just my name. And he was extremely hostile. So while I'm on the phone with him, I look him up. There's D. Just so y'all know, that's who D is that called me, right, from the John Oliver show, and who wanted to to put us up against the wall, so to speak, and really make us squirm with his really pejorative questions. What's interesting is the questions, and we published them yesterday, and so you can read how hostile they are for yourselves. Those questions are identical to about 5 different media requests I have gotten, and they're all focused on Reem Aslam's report on violence in women's sports and our submission to it. And they're all almost the same identical questions, almost the same, word for word, almost like someone's pushing a narrative, right? So I asked Dee about that. I said, gosh, this is interesting, that these are almost the same questions we're getting. They're all coming from trans-identified males in different tiny little, publications, right? But it is almost the identical same set of questions. So for grins, I went and looked, okay, where is this coming from? Where is Wolf and Reem Al-Salam and SheWon.org tied together? And we're like in some trans chat room, like there's some trans chat room on Reddit where they're tying us together, and a couple of more of the sort of manosphere spaces that they all like to hang in and scream about women. So there you go. So we responded to those questions and put them up on our website. So you're welcome to look at them. It's my suspicion that they're not actually going to do a segment. They tried to say that it's going to be on Sunday. It'll be Sunday night that the show will air. And he was very smarmy on the phone with me. And he said, well, I might not even quote you. I said, oh, that's fine. Like, I know you think that I'm just terrified, but I am not. What are you going to do to me? And so I don't think they're going to air it. I think this is his pet project, honestly. And I think it's him trying to push this on John Oliver. I did check around. Icons also got questioned about it. They got questioned about their lawsuit for the San Jose State volleyball team, where they've been putting that guy on the team, and the captain, Brooke, is suing them for that, suing the NCAA for that. And then Riley Gaines also got a ping, but nothing further. So it looks like it was just us, Icons, and Reem got a ping too. And Reem and I talked about it and how we wanted to respond. And her response is also live. So whether they do anything about it on Sunday or not, we don't, whatever. We don't expect any fair treatment from them, but we wanted to put them on notice that, hey, this is who reached out to us. This is what the questions you asked. That was very hostile framing. And here's our responses. So there you go. So that's a report from the Conference on the Status of Women, and an update from our friend Reem Al-Salam and the John Oliver Show.
Why was Reem Al-Salam blocked out? Did the UN offer any explanation? Like, that is just outrageous.
No. So something that everyone needs to know about the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls. That was, again, in that amazing freaking decade of women in the 90s, which there are, not that I ever want to go backwards, y'all, but there are days when I wish we could bring the 90s forward rather than this global evisceration of women's rights that we're seeing. That UN Special Rapporteur was created by mandate in 1994. So that's where that got done. And it is a volunteer position. She does not get paid. She also does not have like her own department. She gets like a little bit of an admin assistance, right? I think she has like 1.5 personnel or something that's dedicated to her. So Reem is doing all of the things that she has been doing pretty much on her own speed, right? Which is still astonishing. And prior UN statements, as you all know, have been very accepting of the trans agenda, which by the way was pushed by the United States and Canada. That is us that has done this, right? We are the ones that have pushed this on the UN. They didn't come up with this all by their little selves. And they've also had the sex workers work crowd have just totally overrun them, right? So for Reem to step up and say the things that she is saying, the rest of us, when we first started seeing her do it, we're like, oh, who is this woman? You know, where does she come from? We have wanted the UN to say these things. Oh my God, you know, like how did she get to, you know, in that spot, right? So Reem will be holding the mandate for only 2 more years. So we only, and you can be 100% sure whoever replaces her will probably not be this amazing, right? Like that is, they're probably going to silence her. Reem's caused a lot of problems within the UN, and good kind of trouble, right? Like she's made the Human Rights Council have to listen to how brutal prostitution is for women instead of going with the sex workers work crap. She's had to, you know, really come, and she's gone to bat for us on the trans stuff a lot. So we are extremely, for all of us women, you know, we are extremely appreciative of her. So I think there was a couple of things. I think Reem might have been coming from Libya to New York, and I think that's why the visa was denied. She was coming from some country that the United States is not friendly with. Reem lives in Jordan, but I think there was definitely some problem with immigration, no question about that. But the UN did not step up and intervene. And that was the shocker. And so no, they gave us no explanation, but it went around, you know, the entire conference like, she's not here. And what really was upsetting was she said, okay, look, so if I can't get on the plane because the US won't accept my visa, then how about if I video conference in? The UN has great video conference, you know, facility. Y'all saw some of them, right? They have big screens, they have, you know, all of that. That part does not make any sense to us at all. She was going to give an address to the General Assembly. Nope. So that is a shocker to us. So she's been quite targeted, you know, within the UN, and she gets a lot of, UN is an extremely bureaucratic organization. And so for her to get through some of the hoops that they put her through just to get her reports published, get on agendas, et cetera, it's a real problem. You might remember that Nikki Haley, when she was the ambassador for the United States to the UN, she stepped off the Human Rights Council, the UN Human Rights Council. She took the US off of it. And her reasoning at that time, and this was about, I don't know, 8 years ago, her reasoning at that time was the Human Rights Council is not about human rights. It is for Iran and others to pick on Israel. That's what they do in that council. And so that's why she took us off of it. And then Linda Thomas Greenfield went back on, but we are stepping off of it again. So, you know, and Reem is an instrument of the UN Human Rights Council, right? The special rapporteur reports up to them. So she has caused a lot of problems for them. And I agree with Nikki Haley's assessment that they don't do human rights there. They do a lot of stuff, but it's not real human rights work. So, however, Reem is still firing solid, as you know, and she's asking for input now on surrogacy. And I highly encourage, you know, women across the world, please give her input on that, because that is another aspect of commercial sexual exploitation of women that needs to be stopped. And there's a lot of human trafficking and brutality involved in surrogacy. Plus, there are males buying babies, right? And that is never going to be good and not a good thing. So, so please support her. Please, you know, send her a nod and a hug, because I think she needs to hear it from all of us, because she's also getting very fatigued, but she's really, she's good. So while we've got her, we need to use this megaphone that she's got for all it's worth.
So we will move on to Alison Jenner, who is going to give us a report of the conference of the Liberal Democrats in the UK. So with that, I will hand it over to Alison.
We have a conference that every year there's one in March and another one, an autumn one in September. And we've just come back from the March spring conference in Harrogate. We feel we did really well this time. I'll tell you a little bit about the Liberal Democrats and women. There's a history of a discrimination against sex realist or gender critical members. Back in about 2018, Lynn Featherstone sent out an email to Liberal Democrat members about LGBT History Month, saying that those of us who had questions about transgender claims of rights were supposed feminists, that we weren't really feminists and we should leave the party. Well, the link is no longer works. That used to take you to the party website, but there are still news reports extant about them. And I remember it well. I had been thinking, should I leave? And then being told I ought to, I wasn't going to be pushed out just for having scruples. But ever since then, there have been accusations of transphobia levelled at members who've spoken up about issues that affect women. I've had quite a number of complaints against me since we spoke at the first online conference about trans women not being women, trans men not being men, etc. But they've always been decided in my favour, thankfully. Once we formed Liberal Voice for Women, we wanted to hold a fringe meeting at conference, have an exhibition stand there like other party bodies and organisations that aren't officially party bodies, but also exist within the party as members. Each time, each application had been vetoed. We wrote to the party leadership and we got no reply. Eventually, we decided that we had to take this further, and a legal case taken by the chair, Dr. Zoe Hollywood, me, and the Liberal Voice for Women executive was made. We didn't want to crowdfund at the time, as we wanted to try and solve the problem positively and hopefully avoid a court hearing, if possible. So we halted the case when the general election came up, and eventually, once the party had got good legal advice, we recently were able to conclude it satisfactorily by the party sending a letter to every local party, every regional party, and the party is a federal party, so the party in England and Wales and Scotland, every official organisation, bodies such as Lib Dem Women, who you would think would be working for all actual women, LGBTQIA+, that's the alphabet people, Young Liberals, LD Campaign for Racial Equality, etc., telling them that gender critical members must be treated equally with any other members. And we are absolutely delighted with that. It's official. And a comment from within some of these groups have been incorrect. Suggestions that we have been bullying the party, which is the usual sort of Darvo that you probably are familiar with. The fact that the Liberal Democrats have undertaken no longer to discriminate unlawfully against members in good standing who are sex realists and critical of gender. And here in this country, this is a protected belief. It's protected under the protected characteristic of religion or belief, or lack of belief. And so, when we're accused of being Nazis, of course, we're not like Nazis, because Nazis and anti-Semites would never get protection for their horrible beliefs. And we're satisfied that the party will not indemnify members against claims for unlawful discrimination. The party has told regional parties to let us have a stand equally with other party groups, and the members' code of conduct will or should support any future discrimination, claims of discrimination against us, and we'll be able to take action if that's the case. Now, things aren't perfect. Things are, people are still going a little bit berserk about this, but part of the result has been to enable us to have a stall at the same rates as other party groups, which are not official AOs, they're called, official party bodies. And last September at Brighton, we had our first stall in the exhibition, but it was at commercial rates, which was, eye-watering. No fringe, no advertising, anything like that. And a few members then went crazy, accusing us of blackmailing the party. Instead, what actually happened was we had been able to ensure conformity to the Equality Act. So a couple of weeks ago, we were able to advertise our stall and fringe event in the official bulletin, have our fringe not in some remote hotel far away from the venue, but absolutely in the heart of the conference venue. And even more members came to our stall to sign up or discuss what they did or didn't agree with, and take away our leaflets on various topics, including men's violence against women and girls, as well as women's rights to single-sex spaces. And we were very fortunate in that we had some volunteers from the Women's Rights Network, a big network across Britain, who helped to hand out flyers for our fringe events to delegates waiting to register and enter the conference. Last year, because I had been suspended because of complaint, I was outside giving out leaflets saying, come and disagree with us, come and disagree with us, go on, come and have a go, see if you don't agree with us and see if we can change your mind. But actually I was inside in a meeting, and so we had some conference, some volunteers outside giving out our leaflets about a fringe, and our leaflets about what's wrong with the the motion that was going to be held. I'll come to that in a minute. So Friday night, the first night we were there, we had a fringe in the conference venue, absolutely full, in mid-30s in the hall and 35 online via Zoom. We had really great guest experts, Dr. David Bell. Some of you will know of him. He is a retired psychiatrist. He was a staff governor for the Portland and Tavistock NHS Trust. Here we are, that's the gentleman in the middle. And he raised alarm after staff, psychologists and psychiatrists, relayed their concerns over the youngsters being put through GIDS without proper screening, focusing only on gender and ignoring many comorbidities such as previous trauma, autism, sexual assaults, youngsters with ADHD. And you'll see this huge spike that we've got in the little picture here in the rise of girls being complaining of gender dysphoria, which haven't been an issue. You look back at earlier years, mostly it was boys, young men. Our other experts included Professor Sally Baxendale, a specialist in clinical neuropsychology at University College London, and Kate Barker, who's the chief executive of LGB Alliance. All our speakers were excellent. David was relaying the worries about gender overshadowing, Sally explaining how important the CAS review had been and how important it was to move forward with the recommendations, and people making unsupported claims about the review, how they were wrong. And Kate Barker showed a startling statistic and a visual for gay children at GIDS. Here we are. This is the proportion of lesbian, gay and bisexual people in the general population, 2.5? And the next picture, that's the proportion of lesbian, gay and bisexual youngsters at the GIDS clinic at the Tavistock. It's absolutely enormous, isn't it? And out with our experiences. So people have been asking for copies of these slides, and they were really shocked about this. And part of the audience actually included senior people, ostensibly checking that there was no trouble. So hopefully they now have a better appreciation of what we're about. And the Fringe event is now up on our YouTube channel. I'll put a link to that later on that you can have a look at in the chat. The big debate on Saturday morning was on, it's called F9, motion F9, free to be who you are. This was really the first time there has been a proper debate for years, and the first time that factual arguments have been permitted for years, if ever. It has been, there we are, that's the motion. What's wrong with motion F9? Our volunteers were handing out leaflets to everybody about this, and it's been a turning point. Numerous members, including elected members, again came to our stall to tell us that they agreed with us. The leadership, we think, needs to accept this and be braver in acknowledging the truth. There were some excellent speeches against the motion F9 on Saturday. In total, 5 speakers against were called, including our chair, Zoe, and also Deirdre, a biology teacher, Toby Keynes, who spoke as a gay man about his concern for the conversion therapy bill, outlawing all conversion practices, which of course we think includes transing gay kids. Natalie Bird, who recently won her case against the Lib Dems for their discriminatory treatment of her, she was understandably nervous about her reception, but still bravely went up to speak. She focused on the Gender Recognition Act, and an excellent speech from Zoe, and from former MP and MEP Chris Davis, who really gave an astonishing speech about the whole phenomenon. We posted his speech on social media, and it's actually the pinned post on Lib Voice 4, number 4, Lib Voice for Women, if you want to have a look at that right now. The conference voted to withdraw an amendment that merely noted the CAS review, so no mention of the CAS review at all, and voted for the motion as a whole, full of gender-affirming care and demedicalising the process to gain a recognition certificate, which would allow men and women to have a false sex birth certificate. And basically, demedicalising is code for basically self-ID, although the party said it's against self-ID. They voted for an amendment to give gender-affirming care. We wanted to, but the majority voted against, delete lines on self-ID, on the spousal exit clause. There's a clause in the Gender Recognition Act which allows for each spouse to be able to use the interim period of 6 months for them, either of them, to annul the marriage. It's been totally changed, and the marriage of a man and a woman has now been turned into a same-sex marriage. We also wanted to stop enabling people who say they're non-binary to have not their actual sex but an X on their passports. But anyway, they voted that down. A number of speakers for were absolutely amazing, and the alt facts that were in play made you gasp and stretch your eyes. And the chair of LD, Liberal Democrat LGBT+, summing up the debate, gave several pieces of false news. For instance, gender affirming, only 1% of people regret undergoing gender reassignment, whereas there are estimates of 30% or more from Lisa Littman's work. You'll probably know that a lot more people don't turn up to follow-up treatment because they don't want to go back to the people who've operated on them. Puberty blockers have been given out since the 1980s, but of course not for long term, and for a proper medical problem with risk of potential harms having to be weighed and balanced in the prescribing puberty blockers for people who have precocious puberty very much earlier than normal. She also said that males who trans have no sports advantage, and we know obviously that is not the case. There's post-pubertal male advantage, and gender identity is fixed between ages 3 to 5. Now, we understand that that's not true. That's counter to, for instance, Piaget's findings on child development. And now this will interest you. She declared that 2 billion people live in the 30 countries which have self-ID, with no case of a man falsely claiming to be woman to enter women's spaces. I thought I'd ask you, if you live in a country like Ireland, Germany, India, Brazil, or others with self-ID, to send us some of the problems you've encountered with women's single-sex spaces being ignored or breached or removed. And you can send them to us at info@liberalvoiceforwomen.org. So now it's official Lib Dem policy. However, we arranged for some polling to be undertaken. We had some polling with YouGov. They interviewed 628 adults, of whom 584 are actually still members, which is quite a good poll number. 76% of Lib Dem members thought that the current process for achieving a gender recognition certificate is about right or not demanding enough. We wanted to ensure that parents were informed about school children wanting to transition, and 61% of other Liberal Democrat members wanted the parents to be informed. We asked, should the CAS review be supported? And more members wanted to accept the findings of the review, 4 times as many at 35% as the 9% who were against it, and 20% who wanted us to remain neutral. 63%, a big red ring there in the second line of the first page, 63% of members agree that the spousal exit clause should stay. Campaigners, including trans speakers at conference, call it a spousal veto, but as I say, in fact, either spouse can apply for an annulment. In relation to puberty blockers, that's the middle one on the second page, 54% of members thought that they should not be available to children under 18. Only 25% wanted puberty suppression for gender questioning children, and 21% didn't know. Again, RSE, that's relationships and sex education. We asked, YouGov asked the respondents, should parents be able to see teaching materials for RSE? 71% are in favour, and only 17% against. And finally, even given the result of this motion, we felt that we had a fair chance to speak for the first time ever. An experienced chairman was introducing 1 for, 1 against, 1 for, 1 against, and we haven't seen that before. But now we need liberal-minded people, men and women, former members, to support us in working with members, rank and file of members, to press for change of policies and the adoption of policies supporting reality. If you are or know an ex-Liberal Democrat, ask them to contact us and join us and try and make change in our party. The poll was of 628 adults were polled, of whom 584 are still members. Our email address is info@liberalvoiceforwomen.org.
We're now going to go to Joe Brew and Sally Wainwright, who will be talking about lesbian persistence. Welcome, Joe and Sally.
We're here at a lesbian event. I'm sure most people watching know by now, but WDI published a book called Women's Rights, Gender Wrongs, The Global Impact of Gender Identity Ideology. It's got contributions from women in, I think, 38 different countries. It's split into 2 halves. One is a series of short essays about gender identity ideology and the writer's experiences of it. Some of it's quite very, very personal, and some of it's quite academic and everything in between. So it's a very wide-ranging kind of view of the impact that the ideology is having on women around the world. And then the second half is a set of standardized country reports, so you can compare the progress or lack of progress in different countries, and that's done against the declaration. So we ask questions about the articles of the declaration and where each country stands on that. It's been quite successful. Sales were starting to sort of slow down a bit, but then a couple of things happened, including Menno did an interview with me, which he'd done months earlier, but he finally got around to publishing it in November, I think. And that's really helped put sales up as well. And Kath Aiken, who's my co-editor, and I are going to be doing perspectives on it in June. So if people want to join that, they might want to kind of get a book and read it beforehand. Should be available from Amazon.
Yeah, and just to say, we've got a conference. WDI has a conference in July in London, and if you haven't yet got tickets, there are online tickets and in real life tickets. We'll keep on updating what's going to be going on, but quite a lot of people have bought the book to pick up at the conference, so that's really nice that it has lasting appeal.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, gender identity ideology still lasts. I'm kind of hoping for the day when nobody will want to read the book anymore, or at least there's no more than a kind of historical look at something dreadful that used to happen.
Yeah,
but sadly, that's not the case yet.
Could you say a little bit more about the conference this summer?
Oh, yes. So I'll do that now. So the conference that we're going to have in the summer is going to be continuing the theme of WDI, which is promoting the declaration, building international sisterhood. And we think that we're going to sort of reiterate or continue to promote the special job of Women's Declaration International, which is international networking around TERF issues. So I find it funny because I'm an old Marxist, an old lefty, the TERF International, like the Third International, but we're the TERF International. But we're going to be really, and we called it the global silencing of women, but we think we might change the name and call it something else, like international something. But we'll spread that around, and it should be fantastic. Cara, you're going to be coming. Sally hopefully will be there. I'll be there. Sheila Jeffers will be there, Lauren Levy, Amparo Domingo. We've got quite a large list of speakers. If you're listening now and can come and want to speak, then just email and we will continue to send information out. So I think it's going to be really good. We'll invite lots of other, related women. So it should be a really good international networking thing. It was great last year.
It was. Can I add, if you would sort of quite like to speak, but you've never done that before and you're a bit anxious about it, I think it's really, you know, we can do a lot to support you, and it would be really great to have some different perspectives as well. If you've got an idea about stuff that we haven't already thought of, it would be really, really good to get some new speakers in. So please really don't be backward in coming forward, so to speak. We'd really love to hear from you.
Yeah, and we're going to have workshops as well, and so some activities. So it won't be all just speeches. And then yes, definitely sort of everybody is welcome to participate and to speak. Right. Okay. Well, let's move on to the next thing. So, Sally, you're also involved, or maybe set up Lesbian Persistence. Can you tell us about that organisation and why and what, etc.?
Yeah. Well, to go back a little bit, this time last year, more or less, it occurred to me that there was about to be this major case for Women in Scotland case against the Scottish government, which looked at the definition of a woman and whether that included men with a gender reclamation certificate. And I'd been concerned for quite a long time that there wasn't really a lesbian perspective ever in that. It got touched on a little bit, but there wasn't a really strong lesbian voice in that. And I felt that would make a difference to the case. And in fact, I think it did. And so I suggested a lesbian intervention, and 3 organisations, 2 English ones and a Scottish one, came together and sort of formally put in an intervention, which was quite significant in the whole case. And we're hoping for a result before Easter, but it's getting closer and closer to Easter. So it may be after Easter, and I'll come back and talk about it, you know, once we get the judgment out. But that made me think, and made several of us talking about it, realize the importance of having a proper, strong lesbian voice, and an organisation that lesbians could join in and participate, and you know, have their views heard within the organisation as well. So we set up Lesbian Persistence. Unfortunately, we weren't named in the For Women in Scotland case because we didn't exist at the point that the lesbian intervention went in. But since then, we've set up this organisation. We launched in November last year. We've got kind of 2 aims. One is to raise the profile of lesbians socially, culturally, and politically. And the second one is to build lesbian community. And I mean, to me, they go very much hand in hand. Back in the day when I was sort of young lesbian, there was a lesbian community in the UK. You know, I lived in a lesbian housing co-op. We had about 30 houses spread over 2 or 3 streets, actually very in the East End of London. And that lasted for a number of years, and it was really, really important. And we had lesbian discos, and we had lesbian bookshops, and we just had lesbian events. You could just live your life, an ordinary life, but you could live it predominantly with other lesbians, or as much with other lesbians as you wanted to do. And gradually, I think largely, or at least partly, because of the impact of the encroachment of gender identity ideology, and the fact that men have started turning up at lesbian events and saying, well, we can come too now because we're women and we're lesbians. That's the definition. You know, if you're a heterosexual man and you're allowed to call yourself a woman, you're still attracted to women. So by definition, if you're a heterosexual man who's a woman, then you're a lesbian. I mean, it's completely absurd, which was the case we made at the High Court, but at the Supreme Court. But it was so important that lesbian community to me when I was growing up. I'm really, really aware now, for example, that there are very few young lesbians that are visible, and there's nowhere for them to go. And there's nowhere for us as older lesbians to meet, or there hasn't been until quite recently. There's starting to be a little bit now. And so we wanted to set up an organisation which would provide more of a sort of social network and try and build a lesbian community. But also we wanted to do some political activism around it. So would you like me to say a bit about what we've done?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, socially first, when we first launched, there was about 10 of us, I think, initially, and we had a little party at my house. It was Halloween, so we all wore witches' hats and had a good time and had a bit of a chat about what we were going to do. And then we went on to have various meetings in pubs, and gradually we were inviting women to join, and we've done it all. At the moment, we've grown organically through women that we know. And so we haven't had a screening problem, but I think we will at some point, you know, try and attract a broader number of people. at the time, you know, we were having these sort of pub nights, and we had a cool evening at night at one point, just to invite new women to come along and join us. And then in January, some of you will know that there's a Scottish tradition called Byrne's Night, which celebrates the life of Robert Burns. And there's a sort of set formula for that, which is that you eat haggis, nips and tatties, and you pipe in. The haggis comes in with a bagpipe in front of it, and then somebody reads a Robbie Burns poem called Address to the Haggis, which is all about how wonderful the haggis is. And then you have a meal, and then somebody gives the immortal memory of Robert Burns, where they tell the story of his life. And then traditionally, a man stands up, gives a toast to the lassies, and a woman stands up and replies to the toast to the lassies. And all these talks are followed by, you know, drinking a bit of whiskey, and they're generally taking the piss out of each other a bit and hopefully funny. Sometimes they're very, very serious, but sometimes they're quite entertaining. So we decided that we were going to do an event. It wasn't our original idea. We did it several years ago during lockdown. WDI online, we were going to have a Magdalene Burns night. Only the only thing that was different about it was that this was going to be a lesbian only one, and it was fantastic. So we had the haggis piped in, and we had the address to the haggis, and then somebody stand up and talked about the life of Magdalene Burns instead of Robert Burns. And then we'd been toying with, well, how are we going to do the equivalent of the toast to the lassies? You know, and somebody said, well, we could do butch and femme, but that didn't really fly for very long. And then in the end, we did a toast. Actually, I gave it this time, a toast from the older lesbians to the younger lesbians, and sort of welcoming them into the community. So it was rather more inclusive than the traditional Burns stuff. And one of the younger women stood up and gave a response to that. And it was really fantastic, and everybody enjoyed it. And we think one of the things that's really important that we want to do as lesbian persistence is also, we don't have lesbian traditions. You know, we have all sorts of traditions in the rest of our lives. You know, everybody has Christmas dinner together. I mean, whatever it is that you do, people do things, and you have rituals and things, and those rituals don't exist in lesbian life. So we think that it's really important to start some. So our Burns supper, our Magdalene Burns supper, that is kind of, we're saying it's the first of an annual event, and we intend it to be a lesbian tradition. And I've been talking to other lesbians here today about building lesbian community. And, you know, at least one woman said to me, well, I'm going to do that in the community where I live, which is somewhere in England. And, you know, maybe that's something that we can spread, the idea of Magdalene Burns suppers. And then after that, we had a film night, a lesbian film night, which we just did at somebody's house. And we hope that will be a regular-ish event where we just get together and watch lesbian movies. And then we had a lesbian pancake night, because there's nothing tastier than a lesbian pancake, of course. And sometimes we just put things out, do sort of social things together, like going to the movies or going to the theatre and things. So it's really just about being a social group is really, really important, but building out from that. But we also want to do political work, and the stuff that we've been doing up until now is mostly we've been doing it through responding to various consultations. So the Equality and Human Rights Commission had a consultation on its new guidelines on the interpretation of the Act, or the Equality Act. So that was the first consultation we responded to. And it set the format for what we've done for all our consultation responses, which is to say, and what about the lesbians? And have you thought about this? And have you thought about the way that this affects lesbians? And this is what happens to lesbians when you do that. And what about the lesbians? So, but almost everything we look at, that's the thing, that the lesbian perspective is just completely and totally missing. Like, it's missing from all of the international treaties. You know, CEDAW, which we know is really important in terms of, you know, setting out our sex-based rights as women. The convention itself, the treaty itself, doesn't mention lesbians anywhere. There are no rights for lesbians. So CEDAW was one of the CEDAW committee had a consultation out on a new general recommendation about gender stereotypes. So we put in a response to that, again, talking about the impact of gender stereotypes on lesbians. And we were able to, everybody was able to put in a sort of 3-minute video as well, if they wanted to for an oral presentation. So we did one of them, and they're all on the UN's website if anybody's interested in looking at them. And actually, there was a funny story, because there was only 3 lesbian organisations that, as far as I know, that responded to this particular consultation. So there was Lesbian Persistence, there was the Lesbian Bill of Rights International, and there was the WDI Lesbian Caucus. And when the stuff got posted up, ours wasn't there. And the Lesbian Bill of Rights one was there, but the link was broken to their written submission. But there was nothing at all about lesbian persistence. So I wrote and said, you know, what's happened and where is it? And they magically managed to find our video and put that up and said, well, yes, you know, your video's up here. And then we fixed the link for your written presentation. And they decide, and the Lesbian Bill of Rights International. And it's like, the only thing that connects us and the Lesbian Bill of Rights is that both our organizations start with the word lesbian. But somehow the UN CEDAW people had managed to assume that we were the same people. So we had to deal with them about that. And we did eventually get them to put the lesbian persistence one up as well. But I think it partly shows how unusual it is for them to get submissions from lesbian organizations. And we're really invisible, you know, we're invisible nationally, or invisible internationally as well. So we've also responded to Reem Al Salem, had a couple of consultations out about connected to violence against women, and a sort of connected one on the concept of consent. So we responded to both of them, and then as a result of having responded, we were invited to attend an online discussion with her with all the other groups. So we went to both of them as well. And then I think the last one that we did was something for the Equalities Committee at Holyrood, Scottish Government. Again, we put in a thing talking about the lesbian perspective, and that was really good, because then a couple of weeks later there was a discussion where they were taking evidence from witnesses, and they were asking questions about lesbians, and that's never happened before. And it was very much, oh well, you know, keep feeding us the information, and we'll keep picking it up. So I think, you know, again, it shows how important it is that we raise the subject of lesbians, because if we don't do it, then it's not going to occur to anybody else. And it's very fair dues. I mean, you know, there's no particular reason why heterosexual women should think about lesbians, but we just need to keep feeding them things. And we've got a couple of other consultations in the pipeline as well. So I was talking about all that here today with some women, and it was really interesting. You know, we're talking about building lesbian community, and it was really interesting how much interest there is. And one of the things that was a question that I'd been going to ask was, who here feels that they're already a member of the lesbian community? But actually, when we did a quick introduction of who everybody was at the beginning, it turned out everybody there was involved, or at least everybody who'd come to my workshop was already involved pretty well in one organization or another. So I think this is a real change. You know, we were also talking about something. I was saying, oh, you're going to come to some event, and somebody else was saying, oh, I can't because it clashes with something. And somebody else was saying, oh, yes, you know, there's these other events that clash. And isn't it a drag? But actually, it's not a drag. Some of these are women's events, not lesbian events. But it's brilliant because, you know, 3 years ago, if any of us could find a single event in the whole of the UK to go to in a year, we were doing really well. And now we can't get to them all because they're clashing. There's too many. Yeah, and I think that what's happening is that women did get kind of really, really put down, women, you know, heterosexual women and lesbians, and we did get put down and we did get silenced, and we've said, that's enough, we're not doing this anymore. And gradually we're kind of emerging, and we're starting to set up organizations all over again, and events and activities and politics and things.
But at this event that we're at, we just did wool web weaving, which used to happen at Greenham Common, and we did it, and it was just great. It was really, really nice, and I'd be very happy to do it lots of times, like over and over again, even if it's exactly the same thing, because it's so lovely. And we also did this thing, the spiral dance, where you sing, and Positive Paula Bolton leads the singing, and it's just beautiful. It's so fantastic, and that's, I think, a tradition I've done quite a few times. And like, I remember going to that Radfem Swedish event years and years ago, and doing that spiral dance there. And I think remembering doing these things in various different places is amazing. So the more we can do, and that links up to what WDI, we're sort of thinking we're going to be trying to concentrate, or just at least be explicit about the importance of international networking, that we think, although there's a massive threat to women's rights globally from Trump and all over the place, Afghanistan, in lots of different ways, we actually are doing brilliantly. We, the women's movement and the TERF, International TERF Islands, all of us here at WTI and all our friends are actually, we've mobilized and we're an incredibly well organized women's movement. So we're going to sort of focus on massive achievement that we've done. Okay, well, that's it.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from the US. Last week, Redux reported that a man with a woman identity currently incarcerated at women's prison in Washington state has been charged with intimidating a public servant and malicious mischief in the first degree after he threatened and assaulted a female correction officer. Nani Marcella Lotus Flower, born Nathan something starting with the G, it's a weird name, has a history of violence against women and is currently serving a 10-year sentence at WCCW for the murder of a teen girl. The U.S. Department of Education was very, very busy this week. On the 25th, the department's Office of Civil Rights opened an investigation into Portland Public Schools amid allegations that it has violated Title IX by allowing a male athlete to compete in girls' interscholastic track and field events on March 19th, and permitting the male athlete to use the girls' locker room while female athletes were changing. The male athlete in question, Ada Gallagher, recently took the first place trophy from female competitors in the 200 and 400 meter dashes, beating his closest female competitor in the 400 by over 7 seconds and setting season records. OCR also sent a letter notifying the Oregon School Activities Association, the governing body for the Portland Interscholastic League, that it was opening a directed investigation into its gender identity participation policy, which appears to violate Title IX. On the 27th, Education Secretary Linda McMahon sent a letter to California Governor Gavin Newsom requesting clarity about his stance on whether male athletes should be allowed to compete on girls and women's sports team, after stating he found their participation deeply unfair on a recent podcast, and to inquire as to his intention to encourage California public schools to comply with federal law on this issue. The secretary suggests that a great place to start protecting girls in California K-12 schools is to repeal the state code allowing students to participate in sex-segregated school programs and activities and use facilities consistent with his or her gender identity by calling on your legislature to pass AB 844. The letter also calls on him to reverse California AB 1955, signed into law last year, allowing schools to withhold information from parents about changes to their child's perceived gender identity. Ed asserts AB 1955 violates the Federal Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA, which gives parents the right to access their children's educational data. On the same day, the Department of Education's Student Privacy Policy Office announced an investigation into the California Department of Education for alleged violations of FERPA. The press release announcing the investigation includes an assertion by the California Justice Center that as a result of Governor Newsom signing AB 1955 into law, every public school in California has a policy of denying or effectively preventing the parents of students the right to inspect and review the educational records of their children. On the 28th, Secretary McMahon circulated a Dear Colleague letter directing schools to comply with federal parental rights laws. The letter was sent to chief state school officers and superintendents at educational institutions receiving federal funding, notifying them of their compliance obligations under FERPA and the Protection of Pupils' Rights Amendment, PPRA. Compliance with these laws means that schools must allow parents to review all educational records of their student, including any document related to a student's gender identity. Going forward, the Department of Education will insist that schools apply FERPA correctly to uphold, not thwart, parents' rights. Also on the 28th, the U.S. Department of Education Student Privacy Policy Office, SPPO, announced the launch of an investigation into the Maine Department of Education for alleged FERPA violations. The investigation comes amid reports that dozens of Maine school districts are violating or misusing FERPA by maintaining policies that infringe on parents' rights, and reminds the Maine DOE that state laws do not override federal laws, and educational entities receiving federal funding are subject to FERPA and its implementing regulations. Of note, Maine's DOE has not yet formally responded to the OCR's finding that it is in violation of Title IX by allowing males to compete in sports reserved for girls. On March 17th, the state entity, the Maine Principals Association, and Greeley High School were given 10 days to comply via a signed agreement or risk referral to the U.S. Department of Justice for appropriate action. The Principals Association, which oversees high school sports in the state, and School Administrative District 51, which includes Greeley High School, have both said they will not comply with the agreement, citing state law and the Maine Human Rights Act. And finally, in yet another reminder that courage calls to courage, XXXY Athletics recently tweeted, "Apparently, our Real Girls Rock t-shirt, worn by Brave School Board member Nancy Rumfeld, sparked a 4-hour school board meeting that needed 2 overflow rooms to accommodate all the people that wanted to speak out about it." In an opinion piece published in Loveland, Colorado's Reporter Herald, local resident John Mark Patterson states that he is saddened by the campaign of abuse organized against Nancy Rumfeld, a director on the Thompson School District School Board, who is often in the minority when the board votes, but she speaks for many in our community and puts children first. He advocates that instead of pearl clutching and charging Nancy with thought crime, we should instead look closely into actual policies adopted by the TSD board that might truly put children in physical and emotional danger. And that's all I have today. Thank you.
Hello from Canada. In Canadian news this week, Canadian nurse and women's advocate Amy Ham has been fired by her employer, Vancouver Coastal Health, following the guilty verdict in the case of professional conduct brought upon her by the BC College of Nurses and Midwives. WDI Canada responded to the BC College of Nurses and Midwives with a letter expressing our concern at the outrageous decision their panel made. Canada will finally have a federal election on April 28th. WTI Canada will be sending a survey out to all MPs and MPPs to get an idea of where they stand on women's sex-based rights. A paper published in the Canadian Pediatrics Journal reveals that pediatricians in our country are still being encouraged to charge full steam ahead with what they call gender-affirming care for minors, ignoring the mounting evidence of the harms of puberty blockers. The paper encourages puberty suppression and suggests that parents who do not affirm may be at risk of harming their child. And finally, finishing off with some good news, Dr. Linda Blade was awarded with the King Charles Coronation Medal last week, awarding her for her work in the field of sports. Congratulations, Coach Blade. And that's all I have today.